Hey, Calan, how you doing? I got your work up here. I noticed that there's no written observation based on your experience with the design, and I just want to talk about that for a second. I think it's really, really important for students, and I know you a lot of times you do this. You'll give a good written um, synopsis of your experience with the assignment. I noticed there isn't one there, and the relevance here, Calan, is this: is that it's really important just to give a little. I think the more detailed you are with a paragraph or so of observations based on the assignment and your experience that you had with the assignment. Quite often, we instructors get as much. I can pick up as much about what you are learning based on your writing than I can pick up looking at your work. So I think not only my class at all, but all of your classes, think about just writing up a quick little paragraph of descriptions based on your experience with the assignment. I think it really helps a lot. It's by no means a requirement. I just think it's really a good practice. So just thought I'd mention that, Calan. Let's go ahead and jump to your fire and ice, which I have up right here. Okay, and then I've got this one up right here. I know this is like kind of like the acid test, right? We put it up against the real deal. And I think I've had students in the past email me and say, hey, wait a second, I didn't know you were going to do that. And it's just a way for us to take a look at what I consider to be. I typeset this in Illustrator using the exact same tools that are available in InDesign. So I consider this to be kerned and spaced and letter spacing and kerning. I consider it to be perfect for this, for display setting for this phrase right here, fire and ice. And I'll get to that in a moment. But actually, I won't get to that in a moment. I'll get to that right now. The reason I consider this to be perfect letter and word spacing is because the letter spacing, I think, speaks for itself. I think each one of these, there's no unusual spaces. There's no unusual gaps. Each of the words, each of the letters in the words are able to be perceived by looking at the word and digesting the word as a series of letters. I'm sorry, digesting the word as a group. So looking at the word fire and seeing fire as opposed to seeing F-I-R-E, which sometimes results when letter spacing is too wide, right? So the point I'm trying to make here is that as we expeditiously kern and word space, adjusting, tracking, letting, and letter spacing, individual letter spacing, so tracking and kerning, basically, it allows groups to be perceived by the mind. And in this particular case, we perceive this group as fire and ice, right? So we can clearly see this and see this is perceived as fire and ice. Whereas, of course, if there's a wider space right here, the mind would be forced to see fire and ice, creating an unnecessary break based on letter spacing. So we can see how improper letter spacing can completely change the cadence of any given phrase or sentence or even paragraph. So that's just another reason why letter spacing and word spacing is so important. Okay, one of the things I'm seeing here is craft. I think you're using a marker that's too wet. You're getting a lot of ink bleed right here. Take a look at that eye and compare it to this. Look how sleek this eye is. That nice tapered serif at the top, but this is just kind of like a blob. Same thing on the bottom, these gorgeous little curves right here and right through here. They're coming into this straight serif that rests upon that baseline. Just gorgeous, gorgeous form, right? Over here, it's just really fat, and there's no distinction between those curves in the serifs. And to a really high degree, we're not seeing the axis of the letter forms. And that, of course, is based on the fact that we're not seeing a good depiction of variable stroke widths in the letter forms. And variable stroke widths, of course, we learned through our week 2 lectures, variable stroke width will define the axis of the letter form. Consistency in that axis points to overall consistency, improving readability and legibility. So we can see, for example, the C. It's almost like monostroke. So one individual size for the stroke, like we saw in that Franklin Gothic typeface we used for the banana example. But look at the difference here. Look at how thin it is through here, and then how thick it becomes through here. Again, that's a variable with stroke, and we definitely want to see that in your final rendering for fire and ice. As far as the word spacing and letter spacing goes, let's talk about it. I think right now the word spacing is really wide. I think also this space right here is a little bit wider than this space. So we can see, based on my previous examples and descriptions, we can see how the mind would perceive this um, quite easily, could see this as fire and ice. And that's because there's a little extra space right there. So we're actually adding a resting space, and the mind is forced to think that there's a space there. So the mind actually fills the space there and reads this as fire and ice, as opposed to fire and ice, right? So that again points to inconsistent word spacing. So I would close this space down, try to get these to indicate very, very consistent volume between the words. And also, I think that the words in general are too wide. So not only is this wider, but in general, the space between the words is too wide. And the relevance there is that this could possibly be perceived as fire and ice as opposed to fire and ice, right? Okay, so yeah, I think, do you have a rapidograph? I don't know if you have any drafting pens or fine drawing tools, but I would rather, if you have a rapidograph, that would be great. I know when I trace letter forms, I use a rapidograph, but it's also a $25 pen. So, I'm by no means suggesting you go out and get a rapidograph for the final rendering of fire and ice. But I would say it would probably be better at this point to use a harder lead than marker, because you're getting a lot of ink bleed with the marker. I'm more interested in craft than I am in contrast. So if you have to sacrifice contrast by going to lead from marker to lead, so be it. I'm fine with that. I just really want you to get the nuance of each of these letter forms. Okay, word spacing is pretty good. I think in general, I think we're pretty wide all the way through though. So we see fire. This right here. Let's close that down a little bit and then follow suit. Once you refine those serifs, you'll see that you can bring these much closer without having this like really kind of heavy visual weight right here based on the fact that your serifs are so large and bulky. So close down fire I, the space between I and R, the space between R and E. And I think it's okay, but again, generally just a little bit wide. So just close these down a touch. And then ice, I think ice is, not sure what happened with ice, but the letter spacing here is just doesn't follow suit for fire, and these spaces are really, really wide, as we can see comparatively. So let's close down ice as well. All right, fantastic start. Thank you so much for including your work. If you have any questions, this is our last trial by fire assignment, so this is it. You have to admit they're wonderful exercises, and I still trace letters to this day. I've been a graphic designer for over 25 years. I'm chuckling when I say that because wow, time flies. Anyways, I've been a graphic designer for many, many, many years, and I still, when I get an assignment, when I get a project, and I have a collaborative designer or a client that I'm working with, and they're really stuck on using a particular typeface. If it's a typeface I'm not familiar with, you better believe, Calan, I'm in here with my rapidographs and I am tracing letter forms. And the reason is because I want to have an intimate knowledge, an intimate relationship, so to speak, with the font. So the only way to get to know the nuances of fonts is to study form and counterform. That's the form is the shape, and the counterform is the counter shapes, the shapes around the letter. And really, by studying those, you get a great idea of how to space and how to use the typefaces effectively. All right, so enough of that. Any questions at all, please let me know. If you have anything that that could clarify between now and Sunday, just let me know and I'll be glad to do that. All right, great start. Thanks so much for sharing.